Hello and welcome back to Life Nurse. Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be looking at a Heuer Big Eye chronograph Pre-Carrera model from 1945, a really beautiful example, and very excited to jump into this video with you as the first video of 2025. Part of the history of Tag Heuer as a brand is their exceptional contribution to the production of chronograph watches. In 1963, the brand known as Heuer, prior to their acquisition by Technique d'Avant-Garde, or Tag, in 1985, launched their arguably most famous chronograph model, which is the Carrera. This model was named after the Carrera Panamericana, a car race from the northern to southern border of Mexico. But prior to this, Heuer had created many famous models of chronograph watches that are coveted by collectors today. One can look back as early as 1908 when the brand released their Sphygmometer pocket watch chronograph, which helped physicians determine pulse rates of their patients. They also released dash-mounted chronographs for automobiles and airplanes. The first wrist chronograph to be released by Heuer was in 1914, and it launched the complication as a staple for the offerings that the brand would have into the rest of the 20th century. The way that most collectors describe chronographs produced by Heuer are kind of in two ways, especially when you have these very similar aesthetics to the watch you see in front of you for this video today. Most of the time they describe them as pre-Carrera or post-Carrera. This obviously excludes a ton of other chronographs produced by the brand, like the Ottavia, but it is an attempt to describe a very specific type of chronograph that's different than the Ottavia or other types of chronographs, and it's basically describing sort of the archetypal chronograph, a 2 or 3 register dialed chronograph with a very clean, simplistic look. The watch today is a great example of what is known as a pre-Carrera model. The watch was manufactured in 1945 based on the serial number of the movement, and this watch is often described as being it's kind of the way that one would describe this watch is as a Heuer nicknamed Big Eye Pre-Carrera chronograph. The reason why this is described as a Big Eye is what you see is a 2-register chronograph, and these subdials really look like big eyes that are applied on this dial, taking up a lot of space compared to the rest of the watch. Unlike many other watches made by the brand in steel, this watch is actually cased in 18-karat gold. This specific watch unfortunately has a case back that is in stainless steel that is not original to the watch and was likely a replacement. This specific watch comes with a gold case back. The steel one was likely switched out during a service or lost by the previous owner. The case has a 3-piece construction, so if you look at the side, you'll see the case back. You'll then see this mid case, and then where you'll see the chronograph hands and crowns and crown are integrated into, and then you'll have the top case where the crystal integrates, and you can see by the side of the case that there's obviously this sort of gold piece, and then the crystal sort of fitted on top of that. So 3-piece construction for this watch. One of the very unique parts about this watch is the lug design. So if you look at the lugs, you actually see a really nice double-stepped design that overlaps with the top piece of the case. You can see lugs integrate with the mid case, and then the top step of the lug actually integrates with the or is slightly above that sort of top section of the case. There does appear to be some signs of polishing. You'll see they're not extremely sharp, but not over polished, which I think is nice, and it maintains a pretty strong sharp edges with this claw-like design that gives the watch some nice depth. Another very attractive part about this watch, I think, is the dial. So we've got this yellow gold case, but the dial has really aged incredibly nicely over time. What was likely a white dial has developed to sort of this golden brown layer that matches the case metal really nicely and gives the watch overall a very nice, aesthetically pleasing design. These watches are very typical and very common design for pre-Carrera chronographs. It has printed hour markers that were likely luminescent at one time but have aged over time. You'll then see a seconds track that runs around the outside of the hour markers. It has two subdials, one at 3 o'clock and one at 9 o'clock. The subdial at 3 o'clock is a 30-minute counter for the chronograph, and then the subdial towards 9 o'clock is where your seconds track is running. The watch has really beautiful blued steel hands. You'll see as I kind of reflect the light off of them, you'll see both the subdial hands as well as the hour, minutes, and seconds hand are all blued steel with luminescent material on the inside of the, or was luminescent material on the inside of the hours and minutes hand. What you'll see is on the hours hand, most of the all of the luminescent material has fallen out, so you kind of have this interesting look for that hour hand. And then if you look at the seconds hand, you'll see that there is the luminescent material is beginning to fall out or fall off towards the end of the hour hand. You still have a little bit of it there towards the center of it. It's very common for this to happen for watches of this age, especially given the material that was used during this time period. I think it gives the watch an interesting look, not for every collector, not for every wearer, but a really nice overall look. Identifying the model for this number has been somewhat challenging. Heuer didn't produce chronographs very as much as they did in other case metals like steel. Very few quantities were produced, or comparatively speaking, to the steel models. We managed to find a link to a forum post about the reference 418, where renowned Heuer expert Jeff Stein described that the reference 418 was sold in a period when we do not, and I'll kind of directly quote him here, he said, the reference 418 was sold in the period when we do not have many catalogs or other references to provide information. The 418 is a model that in 1945 we have record of in catalogs of a yellow gold chronograph using the same movement in this specific watch, which we'll get into in a second. The little advertisement that he showed described that there was a 418, 419, and 433 reference, all in yellow gold, that were produced with the Valjoux 23 movement, which is what you find in this watch. And so what I imagine is that this was probably a precursor to that specific reference, or a variation off of that specific model. If you have more information about this specific reference, or you have resources that I could reference, please feel free to reach out. I'd love to see that. Now, to know the specifics of this watch is to understand the movement, which I have described as the Valjoux 23 movement. If you want to see pictures of that movement, I encourage you to go to the first link in the description of this video. There is an article that we wrote on our website where you'll be able to see pictures of the inside case back, more pictures of the watch, as well as the movement. The Valjoux 23 is one of the most important chronograph movements of all time. The movement really comes from the caliber 22, which was launched in 1914 in serial production, which was a 14-line movement that was used primarily in pocket watches. In 1916, the renowned movement maker downsized the movement to a 13-line movement and then started serially producing what is in this watch, which is the Valjoux 23. Incredibly, this movement would go on to be part of some of the most important watches of today, including the Rolex Daytona and the Patek Philippe Reference 1518 and 2499. There are many movements that were produced out of the Valjoux 23 base movement, including, I think, obviously perpetual calendars, perpetual calendar chronographs, I think full calendar chronographs as well. That kind of deserves its own article, but I think the basic characteristics of this movement is that it's a 9-tooth column wheel chronograph movement with 2 registers, which you see on this example here. A 3-register chronograph was bought about in the Valjoux 72, which was also an extremely important movement. A little bit more about the Valjoux 23. It was produced from 1916 to 1974, which is a substantial amount of time for this movement to be in production and used actively in watches. There were about 125,000 units that were made. For the amount of years that this was in use, it's a seemingly smaller number for the production quantity of this movement, especially considering how many years the movement was produced. And so these movements were obviously sold to many brands who would modify them to fit their purpose. As I mentioned, Rolex is one of them, Patek Philippe is another. The version in this watch has very few modifications, just the addition of Heuer's name, logo, and serial number. But one thing cannot be understated about this specific movement. If you are a movement lover, this movement really catches your eye. It's beautifully constructed with lovely depth and in an incredibly attractive column wheel chronograph complication that is fun to see in action. I can't tell you how many times I've popped off the case back of this watch, started and stopped and reset the movement just so that I could see it in action. When you're able to see the gear train move, it's such an enjoyable experience, and I really love that part about watch movements. The watch is 33.5 millimeters in diameter, which is smaller compared to other Pre-Carrera watches that come in at the 35 to 36 millimeter in diameter range. I think the stepped lug design of this specific watch allows it to sit a bit larger, which is helpful for those with larger wrists. In my opinion, the aged dial is really a showstopper. It's so attractive with the case metal that one will catch oneself staring at the dial for long periods of time. And I think another enjoyable part about this watch is using the movement. When you wind the crown, you're met with this really crunchy resistance that's so satisfying to listen to. I'll give you a couple winds here. Super nice. I'm sure you heard it when I started the video. And then when stopping and resetting the chronograph, you're felt with a very distinct, one's sort of met with this really distinct snap of the column wheel chronograph going that is a perfect blend of sort of delicate and firm, and I'll kind of give you a look at that too. So you can see the chronograph moving now. Beautiful chronograph movement. I absolutely love it. You can see that the sweeping nature of this is sort of typical of 1940s chronographs at the time. You can hear that stop and then the reset, snap back to 12. Absolutely incredible movement and super fun to use. I've found myself sort of timing random things throughout the day just so that I can have the opportunity to actually use the chronograph. As I mentioned, at 33.5 millimeters, the watch is going to sit, a little bit smaller on the wrist. I think the lugs with the claw-like design and double-stepped design allow it to sit a little bit larger on the wrist. Overall, I think it's a really attractive watch, and again, dial match in the case metal, really beautiful contrast in colors. I think a really enjoyable piece to have on the wrist. Just like pre-Speedmaster models, pre-Heuer models are such an important part of their brand's history, but also their aesthetic journey in watch design. Not only does this watch lead to important references for the Heuer brand, it also cases a very important movement that powered some of the most iconic chronographs of the era. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at this really beautiful Heuer Pre-Carrera chronograph, also nicknamed as one of the Big Eye models. I think vintage chronographs have there's been enthusiasm for them, and they've kind of waned, and it's kind of come back. I think there's many different opinions about vintage chronographs, but I think it's one of the first complications that I ever fell in love with. Universal Genève chronographs were like the biggest thing for me, and I've had the opportunity to cover a couple of really cool models on the channel with you. And I think Heuer is another example of a brand that was producing exceptionally beautiful chronographs during this time period. I think Heuer produced great examples. Pre-Speedmaster Omegas are really nice. We had one, I want to say a couple of years ago, that we covered, and obviously Universal Genève. I think the history of Heuer is something that's very sentimental to me. One of the first watches that I got was a Heuer as a gift. So being able to cover something like this is really beautiful. I love the first off, the case design. I think the double-stepped claw lugs are really beautiful, and then the dial on this watch is just absolutely to die for. And the movement is also spectacular. I love the feeling of the tactile feeling of the Valjoux 23. If you haven't done it already, I know I mentioned it during the video, please go and check out the article that we wrote about this watch. You can actually see pictures of the inside case back as well as the movement, which is just a phenomenal thing to look at. The depth of the movement and the overall construction is just really beautiful. So I encourage you to go there. You can also see some of the things that we referenced throughout the video, including sort of advertisements that I mentioned about the reference 418, 419, 433. You can go see those on the article. It'll be the first link in the description of this video. I hope you all had a great New Year celebration. I hope you spent it with friends and family, or at least loved ones, and you're ready to go for 2025. Super excited to jump into this year. We're kicking it off with a really spectacular watch. Really happy that we're able to cover this watch for you, and I hope you enjoyed the coverage of this really beautiful Heuer. Let me know in the comment section below what you think about this watch, and if you are a Heuer collector or perhaps are interested in Heuer chronographs, let me know what your thoughts are about this specific watch. I'd love to hear them, so leave a comment in the comments section below. If you are feeling generous and wouldn't mind liking this video, it really does help me out, and if you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel if you are new, and sharing this video with a friend who might be interested in watches, that really helps the channel grow and get these videos to people who might enjoy them. With that said, guys, thank you so much for watching the first video of 2025. I'm looking forward to the rest of the year and the watches that we're going to be covering. And with that said, I will see you in the next one.